Hey all. So it's been a little while since I've made an update to this series. I prefer not to put these videos out before we have a full season with a new tactic because that's basically me guessing, and that kind of ends up not necessarily being better than anyone else guessing. But I did want to get this out in between the two seasons with Planetary Endurance so we could talk about that and Subdue, the partner tactic, and basically what it I think is teaching us about tactics in general, as well as going over some updates to the overall landscape of war attackers. So, for those who have not seen this series before, maybe you've already started writing a comment telling me that it's absurd I don't have somebody in a certain place, but please, this series is not intended to be an absolute ranking of champion quality. This is explicitly not a list of the best champions in the game. It's not necessarily even the most powerful, highest win rate attackers in war. The way I come at this is these are the essential war attackers. These are the champions that when you are planning an offense in Tier 1, because most Tier 1 alliances plan centrally, they have one person say, you go to this fight with this character, use these boosts. And through that lens, I think the characters that it is most important to have ranked up and available in your battle group for when you are planning that offense, that's what this list is. And so you may see characters that are stronger by some measures in lower tiers or even not represented here at all. Please keep in mind the context. And within that context, I am happy to hear feedback. So I look forward to those comments, but just want to get that out of the way in the first place. Additionally, if you're curious about the evolution of this list over time, or if you want to hear me go through the classes one by one, there will be a playlist in the description with some older videos from this series. But without further ado, let's actually get into the characters. I'm going to go backwards from how I normally do and start with Mutant, both to change things up and because I think there's some big things to say. First off, Apocalypse, Archangel, Magneto, still really freaking strong. Not surprising anyone. Havoc is a little bit less frequent of an assignment for us with Sick and Tired gone, but he still remains a very, very powerful character who lines up well against a lot of defenders. I think Planetary Endurance specifically harms some of his better uses, and so we haven't been sending him much, but I'm sure we will again. I do still consider him very much a must have. The way that he gets supercharged when he has a shock on him, the fact that he can become a horseman with Apocalypse, the fact that he's incinerate immune, and his unique form of damage, all of these things mean that I am a huge, huge fan of Havoc. So, the one character on this list I haven't talked about yet, Omega Red, is obviously one of the best war attackers in the game. That remains true. He has probably a higher skill cap than the other four in this tier, but if you are good with him, he is very, very difficult to stop. However, despite the fact that Omega Red is a subdue attacker, I want to call out the fact that subdue and planetary endurance don't really play into the way that Omega Red normally plays. His play style at the very highest end is usually about parrying and waiting, or parrying and one hit, parrying again, staying very close to the opponent, barely moving, and basically letting them cook. That doesn't really line up with the fact that Subdue requires you to be hitting your opponent to landing those neutralizes, or throwing specials to get the Fate Seal up. Now, Omega Red's Special 2 is quite good, but if you throw his Special 1, you're going to eat up your spores, and while you will heal, you'll tank your damage output. It can be difficult to get to the Special 2. Maybe you can use a Power Start, but then that becomes a champion that normally isn't using a Power Start, using one instead of an Invulnerability. It's not that you cannot use him. We have sent him, we have gotten good success with him, other alliances have as well, but I just want to say that it's not quite as straightforward as him just being a great character that has a great tactic, and therefore he works everywhere that you want him to. And that kind of goes to a larger point that I want to get to, which is that I think it's very important when evaluating tactics to not just look at how well they answer the challenge posed by the defensive tactic. But I think attacker tactics really need to be evaluated in terms of how how well does this flow with the overall playstyle of this character. This was a problem that we had, to skip ahead to the next tier, with Kitty Pryde and Debuff Detox as well. Because Kitty Pryde is a very strong character, then and now, but she didn't really enjoy dexing a lot, or God forbid, blocking hits in her optimal playstyle, and so it was difficult to capitalize on her fully with Debuff Detox. Similarly, the safest way to use Kitty is to not throw specials, and so there are some extra wrinkles to using her against Planetary Endurance, because if things don't go perfectly, Subdue often requires you to throw specials as well. Now, there are steps you can take to mitigate that. My alliance has successfully assigned Kitty Pryde. You run recoil more often, maybe you power start, you boost really big, you make sure you close it out so that you don't have to restart from the specials. There are ways to deal with this, right? But it is a little bit harder than it looks on paper, and so that's just something that I want to keep in mind with future tactics. It's not just about does the champion have the tactic, but how easily and most importantly, how naturally is this character going to be able to use the tactic. So, skipping over most of Mutant, I will just say that Toad has continued to rise in my estimation. He was already very good. Um, he's only become better and more relevant with Mantis making it into the war landscape and being a difficult defender in certain spots. Toad pretty much hard counters her, even on node 53. I took a Nick Fury on node 53 with Toad, and I maintain that that was easier than pretty much anything else I could have done. He's a monster. He is pretty much just for skill champions, but he destroys them. Do not underlook, or do not underrate him. And then, just touching on my honorable mention tier, I do have the definitions off to the side, but as a refresher, Tier 1 are the characters where if I don't have them ranked in my battle group, I am actively looking for replacements. Tier 2 is when somebody asks, hey, is there anybody we need? And I go, oh, you know what? We don't have anybody with a ranked Namor. Let's fix that. Because that would make my life easier later. And then honorable mention is more, these characters work, they might make something easier, but this is more somebody has them ranked, they're not on defense, that person is particularly comfortable with this character in a way that other people might not be, let's go ahead and send them. And so I do want to shout out Domino here, because Domino is random as all heck. That is her whole shtick. But she is a more traditional mutant than Omega Red and Kitty Pryde, in that the way you play her is basically to hit the opponent until you throw your specials, and then her specials do big damage. So she actually synergizes really well with Subdue. I haven't assigned a lot of Domino, personally, because her randomness does bug me a little bit, but in good hands, a high-ranking Domino can do some really great things in this tactic, and I know other alliances that have done that with good success. So, keep in mind that for the same reasons that Kitty and Omega are a little bit complicated, if Domino sounds like she would work, she probably does. Moving on to skill, I do want to talk about Valkyrie and Blade real quick. Valkyrie has fallen off a little bit after Conduit, not because she's not better, but just because some of the fights that we sent Valkyrie to now have better answers. Now have other answers, is another way of putting it. And so you don't need to send her everywhere that you used to kind of handle some of those really scary things like Gallon on 51, etc. However, Jessica Jones has also become more popular, and there are other defenders and placements where Valkyrie does really, really well. And so I still think you actively want to have at least one rank 4 or higher SIG 200 Valkyrie in very comfortable skilled hands in every battle group. That's a fairly high ask, but, Ghost is in this tier under the same conditions. You need Valkyrie. And then Blade, similarly, you don't send him everywhere, but I have felt like I need one. I had two available to assign this past season, and that was enough of a stretch some wars, making sure I could path him appropriately, that I also ranked my own to add a third. Again, you don't use him everywhere, but with powerbacks or just relying on the basically built-in powerbacks he has through applying bleeds, he can just spam special twos and delete opponents even without Danger Sense. With Danger Sense, he becomes one of the best answers to a lot of dimensional beings on the map, including Spot, America Chavez, Gallon, Mephisto. They're just some really dangerous characters that Blade solves really, really well. You want him around. In Tier 2, I have put my second champion, Kate Bishop. I built her with the intent of her being usable in war, and I think that her abilities are powerful enough that she will make things easier. There are going to be challenges to her. That is why she has the same fragility tax. If you're not good with perfect release, if you're not comfortable countering the opponent's specials or heavies, if they're stun immune, probably don't do this. But if she's going to work, then I think she is definitely going to make things significantly easier in good hands. I also want to shout out Shang-Chi. Similar to what we talked about with mutants, I feel like he's kind of in a middle ground where, yes, you throw specials with him, but it's often his special 2 that is closing things out. And so it doesn't really feel like he has full access to the Fate Seal. But because he can go unblockable through block, and because he has the stuns, he can block less than other skill champions. And so that part of his kit actually works really well with Subdue and Planetary Endurance, where you can still get up and access the Neutralize regularly. So I do think Shang-Chi in comfortable hands is very, very helpful right now. I also just want to shout out that with Kate in the game now, Hawkeye has gotten significantly easier to use. And so for those crazy people out there who like using him, the window for doing something other than his special 3 just got that much more accessible. Moving on to science, I'm continuing to sing Overseer's praises. I do not have him first on this list because I think he is best. I just want to say the tiers are not really ranked within themselves. But I do think that Overseer is absolutely a must-have. Now, yes, I would assign him less without the current tactic. I would have assigned him significantly less during Debuff Detox without that tactic. But I still assign him without the tactic. I still send him places where the tactic isn't helping him. He is quite simply a monster anywhere that you can take advantage of his immunities. That's normally to poison or nullify. But those nodes and those defenders are common enough that it is really not difficult to find places to use him. And where you can use him, basically you get into cosmic mode with enough gamma and he just melts people. Very, very strong champion. Moving on to Mr. Fantastic. You probably know that I love Mr. Fantastic. I use him in basically every season. I think the only season where I used him less than 5 times was when Conduit was up, which made it hard for him to knock down some of his best targets. But this is not that. Reed is absolutely amazing in Subdue. He has better power control than most of the other Subdue attackers. He has better healing control than most of the other Subdue attackers. He has it at the same time. he just works really, really well for this. He even has increased combat power rate once he gets ramped a little bit, and so he can spam specials more easily than most other science champions. If you're curious, check out my channel. I have a lot of videos on him, but he deserves his spot here in general, and he is really good with this tactic. Red Hulk, I also want to shout out. Red Hulk is good in general. The tactic making him not only incredible against mystics, but also against cosmic and even some tech defenders, has really just made him super impressive. Rolk has done incredible things this last season, so much so that he was actually banned against us in our final war of the season. Now, that didn't stop us for reasons I'll get to later, but you need Red Hulks in your battle group. Scorpion I just want to talk about because while he is absolutely nuts, especially with the synergy with Agent Venom or Venom that allows him to do way more damage than he needs to do, because of that, he was also banned for us most of the season. And so you want to have him around, but he kind of already seems to be falling into that space where anytime there's anything about a season that incentivizes his use, he's probably going to be on the ban treadmill with some of the others. And so you probably don't want to overload on having a ton of him. That said, it's not hard to get people to rank him because he's insane in Battlegrounds, so very small grain of salt on that one. Moving on to Tier 2, I sent so much thing this season. I think I sent out one of our 3 or 4 rank 4 things every single war without going and actually checking it. His double immunities working so well for Node 26 and Path 9 comes up all the time. I've used him even in other places because he has access to that neutralize. Thing is not nearly as slow an attacker as people realize when played properly. And giving him access to neutralize and fate seal has made him pretty easy to path right now. Similarly, I used She-Hulk in a few wars. She did absolutely fantastic. I normally bring her with Reed, sorry for the fantastic pun, so that she has access to those power stings, but she has one of the best slows in the game. She hits really hard. She has exhaustion, and so she can take Sasquatch, and as with Thing, giving her that little bit of extra utility just made her fantastic. I said it again. I'm going to keep doing that. I do want to talk about Quicksilver real quick as well, because while he is not my favorite war champion, and I do think he deserves that fragility tax icon, he can be a little finicky, I think we have somehow already moved over into a place where Quicksilver is underrated in war, because people are just remembering Conduit, where you had to kill them in a single detonation or the fight basically didn't work. And that's just not true anymore. You can go for multiple detonations. You have damage outside the one big whiplash. And Quicksilver has the utility. He doesn't proc the Dex buff. He has the easiest access to Wither out of anyone in the entire game, which is amazing for fighting someone like America Chavez. He has easy access to slow. He has anti-miss utility. He's not my favorite champion to play, but if you have somebody who really likes him and is good with him, do not underestimate his ability to make pathing significantly easier. And so next I want to talk about Cassie Lang here in Tier 2. Power Sting champions do tend to be finicky, but when you combine her buff immunity, and therefore the opponent's lack of Mystic Dispersion, with her ability to increase her opponent's combat power rate, she has more control over when her opponent throws specials than most Power Sting champions, and when you combine that with her impressive suite of immunities, I think that she's definitely going to make things easier. Additionally, I want to call out that a duped Cassie being immune to Power Steal makes her, I think at the moment, the only champion in the game who can tank a special from Ebony Maw and not get who can tank a special 3 from Ebony Maw and not take degen from the Power Steal. I don't want to send her relying on that, but that's a pretty neat little ability there. Moving into honorable mentions, Ant-Man is highlighted for a lot of the same reasons as Cassie. I sent him several times this season. I've said this before, but buff immunity makes being immune to even one of the debuffs on a hazard shift fight much more valuable. Because most of the time, if you're facing a difficult Mystic Defender on a hazard shift node, you want somebody who can deal with both of the debuffs, because otherwise you end up dexing more, you end up feeding them more power, the fight spirals out of control. With a buff immune, like Ant-Man, like Cassie, for that matter, like Titania with the Absorbing Man synergy, having one of the two immunities is usually enough because you are much more able to stall than normal. And then Ant-Man's other abilities come online, and he has done really, really well for us. We also, I mentioned, had Red Hulk banned against us, and our opponent placed 3 Mystics on Path 9 and Tier 1, those 3 Hazard Shift, Poison, Incinerate lanes, because they thought that they had taken out our best 2 answers in Red Hulk and Kingpin. And so we sent Anti-Venom. He doesn't work for all Mystics necessarily, but they didn't put anything that stopped him. I believe it was Mephisto, Absorbing Man, and then Dragon Man. And he did a really good job of handling all 3 of them. If you want to see that war, check out Simula's channel, because he was the one I sent. And he absolutely crushed it. Anti-Venom is not the easiest one to path, but that's why he's under honorable mention, because sometimes when it does come up, he absolutely makes life easier, and he was the choice for that job. Moving on to Mystic, the funny thing is that even in a tactic with Stagger and Nullify immunity, because it didn't give Power Steal immunity, Doom is still insane. We have to acknowledge that. Doom is very difficult to stop. Additionally, because Planetary Endurance relies on the opponent having a lot of buffs, Clairvoyance buff immunity is very, very good. Tigra via her Neutralize is still good. You just kind of have to watch out for the first few blocked hits when you're trying to get your Neutralize up, but after that, you're usually pretty good to go. Hood loses access to his Stagger, but still has his Fate Seal on his Special too. So he works, but you have to be a little more careful with it. Diablo has been an absolute all-star. He is the Subdue tactic, and so he has access both to the Neutralize and to the Fate Seal, and he is very, very good at spamming specials. He actually is slightly less good at that right now, because he loses access to his Nullify, and so when you go to the Special 3, normally what you do is you use the Nullify pre-fight, place 10 buffs on the opponent, and then you nullify them for Mystic Dispersion, so you keep your Giant Poisons active. That isn't working as well anymore, but what you get as a trade-off is that you don't have to ramp him, because you don't have to use any pre-fights at all. You start with more Vials of Might, and therefore you're hitting harder the entire time, and he's just been really, really good for us. Rintra, similar to Tigra, you need to get the Neutralize up, but once you do, very good counter to it. Absorbing Man is in a interesting spot with Planetary Endurance, because he's been very useful. We've sent a bunch of him. I have several war videos on him. Simula used him as well. We just sent an absolute ton of Carl this last season, and will again. But because he's not Subdue, he's in this weird spot where 3 or 4 of his target defenders, the characters he was built to take down, like Hulkling, Arcus, Terrax, and Annihilus, are all Planetary Endurance, and so they are harder for him to fight right now than normal. He can't just turtle up and block their combos. He can still fight them. You often have to hit their block and play around Planetary Endurance the slow way, and he is still very often the best answer for those characters in certain places. But you do have to be a little more careful assigning him, and pay attention to your invulnerability boosts. Moving on to Tier 2, Sorcerer Supreme is still a very good champion. She blocks really well, she has access to Armor Break, and she is the Subdue tactic. We sent her to a Nick Fury boss, and it went really well. She is slower than some of the other mystics, and she loses access to her nullify here, but it just doesn't matter. She's one of the best in the game at spamming specials, and therefore, in this tactic, she's one of the best in the game at spamming fate seals, which make her really, really good at answering some annoying defenders. I also want to talk about America Chavez, who, within the context of Planetary Endurance, is a tier 1 attacker. She is one of my most sent mystics this season. That is true across SSX. If you're not using Chavez in Subdue, you should be. She is absolutely incredible, super adaptable, incredible control, really good at spamming specials, really good damage. Her buff was exactly what she needed, and this tactic is helping her shine. However, I do have her in tier 2 because I think without Subdue, that is more where she would land. She would still be really, really good, and she would make pathing easier, but I wouldn't be sending, 1 to 3 of her every single war without fail. It would be a little bit more picking your battles. So I do want to just kind of couch my enthusiasm in that. And then with honorable mention, I haven't sent Dragon Man yet, but he is also Subdue, and I suspect that he absolutely crushes some of these fights. I also want to talk about Spidey Supreme real quick, because I know that B. McGee has been doing some good stuff with him, and he does line up well. He's squishy, but he uniquely answers certain mechanics. He can do really good damage, he has great control, and one thing in particular that B. McGee said about him that's kind of stuck with me and I want to pass along to y'all is that obviously his target champs are Cosmics. But he's actually a pretty solid answer for a lot of Mystics as well, because you stick that one Spider Seal buff on the opponent, and you are now blunting Mystic Dispersion by 33% while gaining that 33% for yourself for the rest of the fight without any additional upkeep. That is a pretty nice piece of utility, and I could see him moving up in the future. Moving on to Cosmic, Corvus is not going to be sent everywhere in every war, but often that's specifically because people are planning around him, so I feel like I don't need to say much more about this. If your opponent leaves you easy Corvus charges, sending him is often the correct move, and it usually means somebody has a somewhat expensive but extremely simple war. Hulkling continues to be a beast. Gallon has the attack tactic of Subdue, and therefore added Neutralize and Fate Seal to his arsenal, and so he has just been incredible in a lot of matchups. He is normally a targeted nuke that we send to specific nodes, but the tactic has expanded where those nodes are, where those defenders are, just a little bit. It's made him very, very good. Hercules, I don't think I need to talk about. If you're willing to spend enough on consumables and boosts, you can probably just use Hercules for almost everything and ignore most of the rest of this list. So I don't think he's really interesting to say anything further on. Cosmic Ghost Rider is obviously very good, was banned most of this season for us because he's always scary, and with the attack tactic, there was just a lot of stuff that he could take, and people weren't willing to take that risk. And so, funnily enough, that meant that we were basically filling in for him with Captain Marvel movie. Because, alright, well, that hard-hitting Cosmic with immunities and access to armor break and the attack tactic is banned. So what about this hard-hitting Cosmic with immunities, including her pseudo-immunities with how she interacts with Hazard Shift, access to armor break, and hard-hitting specials? She is obviously not as nuts as CGR, but she got the job done for us very, very well multiple times this season. Definitely made things easier having a rank 4. Moving on to tech, I also want to shout out Infamous Iron Man for just continuing to be an absolute bishop assassin. He is insane for that matchup, and also one of the best counters for Atuma in the game, which I think is going to matter significantly more after Atuma gets defensively buffed. Additionally, Infamous Iron Man is good for other mutants. He has those non-contact mediums. He has that power control. He has a really big special too. He's not nearly as broken or universal as Doom, but he is very good, and you want to have multiple copies of him in your battle group. Moving on to Tier 2, we have actually stopped placing Penny Parker defensively for the most part. Planetary Endurance obviously does give you a better reason to place her, but between Gallon, Hulkling, and Corvus, not to mention Hercules, in most seasons we don't place her on defense, and so that means that if you have some ranked up Penny Parkers, you might want to start thinking about her on offense. She is a very, very strong character, and she can end most fights in 3 bars of power, which is less than it sounds like because when she parries, she gains power. She's very, very good. I do want to talk about Captain America Sam Wilson. I didn't end up using him myself, in part because I was just doing other things. He was also on defense for the first chunk of the season, but I really do think that with this particular tactic, especially because once you get his bulwark up, he's going to glance Planetary Endurance and ramp his ruptures more quickly than normal. He should be really, really solid for a lot of these fights. And I do maintain that he is generally underrated. His utility is absolutely top-notch. His damage is enough. If you're good with him, that makes him worth having, worth pathing, and he will make things that much easier. We also did add in both Viv Vision and Future Ant-Man here. I don't think either of them are must-haves as attackers yet, but they're both very, very good. And if you have people comfortable with them, I think there are very much problems on the map they're going to help you solve that you otherwise might have struggled with a bit. I also just want to shout out Doc Ock, because while he's a fantastic champion in the right hands and he does have the tactic, he also has a little bit of the Omega Red problem where you can play around this tactic with him, but it's just a little bit outside the beaten path for how people often want to use him. I'm sure that people are doing great work with him, but I just want to shout out there's probably a little bit of adaptation. And that's where I think attackers sit in Tier 1 right now. So hopefully this was helpful. Let me know in the comments if you disagree with any of this logic, if you think that I should have included someone on this list that I didn't. There are people I didn't talk about to avoid ballooning this video. That was not any disrespect to them. It was more just an acknowledgement that I have talked about them enough in previous videos. But yeah, look forward to the discussion. And until next time, thanks so much for watching, and take care.